This past fall semester, my kids were in a drama class and they were in a play called The Reluctant Dragon. Has anybody seen the play The Reluctant Dragon, or perhaps read the book it's based on? It's basically a story of a young girl who's got an interest in dragons because she's heard that there are dragons out there, so she begins to ask the adults in her community what a dragon is like. And of course, the narrative that she's given is that dragons are dangerous, they should be avoided, and they told these stories about how there's a brave knight named Sir George out there who would take care of the dragons that would come upon their community. But along the way, she actually met a real dragon, and she found out that the narrative that she was given about dragons was completely inaccurate. Actually, she had a great empathy for the dragon that she met, and so she tried to go back to the neighboring community, back to her parents and to the adults of their community, and she tried to convince them that dragons were fine so that her friend, the dragon, could be saved. But they would have nothing of it, of course, and so they hired Sir George to come back in order to be the dragon slayer once more. And so once Sir George actually met the dragon, he had empathy for the dragon as well. And so they were in quite an interesting predicament. How do we, since we can't convince our community that this dragon should live, how can we spare us in this moment? So they came up with an elaborate plan to make it look like the dragon had been passed away and had been fallen and been killed so that they could go on with their life. And so the play ends with the town celebrating that the dragon has been slain. But off in a far corner, the dragon and a few of the main characters are enjoying tea and carrot slices. And I thought to myself, that's kind of a cute play, but at the end of the day, the tension is never resolved. Since the youngsters couldn't convince the crowd of a different story about dragons, they now have to live in seclusion. They have to have two narratives, two different worlds that they have to navigate between. They have to go back into their own community and talk about the story of how the dragon was slain on that great day. Then they have to go off into seclusion in order to have their way in this other world and enjoy fellowship with the dragon. They're going to have to keep that up, that tedious relationship in order to get what they want. Sometimes, as I was thinking about that, as a preacher, you're kind of always thinking, there's got to be a sermon in here somewhere. I thought to myself, this kind of reminds me of, at times, how the church operates. Two different worlds. We kind of, as Christians, we enjoy time in seclusion with people who agree with us and so on and so forth. And then we kind of zip out of a character and we get into a different character, navigating the watching world around us who may not agree with us and who may find our beliefs tedious or maybe unfounded. And so, but we tend to try to keep things separate. And we just say, this is going to have to be good enough for now because we don't see another way. The troubling thing about that relationship, about that agreement, is that it doesn't seem to square with the early pattern and picture of the life of the church. Let's be reminded in Luke's gospel of one of the greatest parables that Jesus ever told, the parable of the Good Samaritan. When there was a man traveling from one place to the next, and he was beaten up and left half dead by robbers, and everything was taken from him, and different people walked by him. And Jesus mentions two religious professionals who were either too busy or not interested to take care of this man's needs, actually pretty much just stepped over him as they continued their journey on their way, leaving this vulnerable human being there without an advocate, without hope. And the Samaritan comes as the hero of the day to take care of this man's needs. Jesus is giving us a subtle warning here as religious people. Even religious people, if we're not careful, we can be unkind, we can be a little bit nearsighted about our own needs. We could be unhelpful, and we can even be a tad deceived. They were deceived on that day, thinking that it was holy for them not to touch this man because after all the things that he had been through. And so Jesus is trying to awaken the consciousness of some of his early followers. And it was probably the consciousness that he knew that would be a germ, an illness perhaps in the life of believers for generations to come. Be careful about your perspective with the watching world around you. So we continue on as Jesus ends his teaching ministry. He is crucified. He's raised from the dead. He leaves his followers behind. And we hear their story in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 1. And in verse 6, we see that this germ of narrow-mindedness is within the early believers in the life of the church. They begin to ask Jesus, is this the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They're basically saying, when is it going to be our turn for our people to have our needs and promises met? And Jesus answers their question by saying, you have to have a larger vision than this. Because I'm sending you not just to Jerusalem, not to just Judea, your country, But I'm also sending you to among your lived-in enemies, the Samaritans, and to the ends of the earth. This is not just about you and your needs and your people, your own secluded haunts that you have here for yourselves. No, this is something that's for the sake of the whole world. And so Jesus sends them, and he ascends back to the Father, and they're gathering together in Acts chapter 2, and they're in an upper room. There's about 120 of them, and they're praying. They're kind of waiting to see what's going to happen next. And what happens next is something quite staggering. In the world below them and outside of their room, there's different pilgrims of their religion that have been gathered for quite some time. And they were there to celebrate a festival in the Jewish calendar. And all of a sudden, in the middle of their prayer meeting, in the middle of their seclusion in the upper room, they begin to speak in a diversity of tongues, and they begin to praise God in all the languages of those who are outside. So it's almost like God saying this: if you think you're going to be secluded, if you think you're going to ignore the perspective of Jesus, then I'm going to take care of things from here. You're going to start speaking different languages so that you begin to preach to these people. And there's a great outpouring of enthusiasm for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they're given a picture for the first time of what the church is going to become on that day. But they had to change what they were doing in order to embody this life that is no longer secluded, but now out in the open to the watching world around them. And so Luke gives us a summary of those patterns of behaviors that the early church did in order to embody this new philosophy, this new mindset of what they were supposed to do. Luke says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe. The believers had everything in common. Every day they continued to meet together. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So this once secluded, a tad narrow-minded, people only looking out for their own agenda, that's who they were earlier in the story. They've had a transformation in encountering God. They've got different patterns and practices. They began to share their stuff. They began to be more active in meeting together. And they made space for new people to be around them. To those who have ears, let them hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. To make room for those who are not yet among us. And so they had a different pattern of behavior. And this story continues to move forward from here. We see the rest of the book of Acts. It started in Jerusalem and ends in Rome, right under the Roman Empire's nose. And the church continues to speak boldly in different parts of the world. But this movement, by the end of that first century, has just a bit of a meager following in the known Roman world at that time. But we know through historical record that from the years 100 AD to about 350 to 400 AD, there's an explosion of interest in the way of Jesus Christ. It's a staggering number. There's a scholar out there named Rodney Stark who tries to chronicle this movement and how it grew exponentially over time in the Roman world, how it went from a secluded kind of sectarian Jewish movement to the most popular religion of the Roman Empire. And this is what he said about people who decided to join the Christian church. He said, think about trying to join something new. Think about like if you are thinking about joining a new club or going to a church, or perhaps you move to a new area and there's this thing out there. Before you sign up and want to be a member of that new thing, you have to go through a bit of a discernment process. Will I get along with these people? Can I navigate their culture? And can I even excel in their ideology and in their culture before I enter into it? We don't just kind of jump in with 2 feet. A lot of people don't. Some people do. You might be married to a person like that. But most of us are pretty guarded. This is what Rodney Stark said about people coming into the church in those first 300 years after the New Testament. I want us to catch this. He says, many times people enter the church not because they began to initially agree with the church philosophically. But he said they joined the church because it was, and this is his term, it's a great, he's got a PhD, he used these words, it was efficacious. So he said, people in the Roman world who weren't Christians, they became Christians because they saw the way they lived life, and they said, this type of life works. So they decided to implode their former way of life, their former worship way of life, the way that they were stingy with their finances and promiscuous with their bodies in order to be promiscuous with their wallets and stingy with their bodies as new Christians. They decided to do that because they looked at the way Christians live life, not in seclusion, but among them, and they said, this type of life works. So the question that I've been wrestling with recently is, are we presenting a life that works among the watching world around us? On our own Jericho Road experiences, when there's someone who's left by the side of the road, are we half tempted to cross over and by them? Or are we eager to address the need and know that our way of life works because Jesus has so transformed us? What I want to suggest is that perhaps we have that same temptation as the early followers of Christ. We tend to get in our upper rooms above and away from the rest of the watching world around us, and God is trying to lure us out into the world so that people could see that his way works. And so what I'm going to do with the rest of my time this morning is just to give a few points of what we could do in response if we want to present to the watching world around us that our way works. This is the way I've done it. If you're on Instagram, you know that you can save posts. Well, I've been saving posts for some months now, and I save them into a collection called Sermon Ideas. So I thought, good Presbyterians allow you to preach 25 minutes. And so I'm going to give you as many of those illustrations that I've saved until now in order to make some points on my last Sunday with you here at Advent Presbyterian Church. The first one is a video of some dads dancing with their daughters at a ballet class. Look at these guys. I mean, look at these guys. Now, this is the point I want to make. I imagine that there was a meeting with the instructors and somebody asked the question, how can we get dads involved with their daughters in dance? And somebody said, why don't we have the dads join us for a dance class? And you can imagine that the other voices in the room are saying, that's a terrible idea. I mean, these guys tend to be on their phones the whole entire class, or they drop them off and they do their own thing and they bring them back. What makes you think that they're going to learn how to do these lifts and to like dance ridiculously in a class with us? But that person who gave the initial idea, they're probably like, well, who knows? Why don't we just try it? And so they tried it. And a wonderful memory was etched in stone in the memory of both dad and daughter of that class today. I came across this amazing video of a bunch of students in Japan on summer break. Go ahead and roll that video for us. They made a roller coaster, a working roller coaster out of their school desks. It's like, so they have a cart, and these are all school desks underneath it, and this is on summer break when, kids should be doing other things, but they're in the storage room of thear school. I wish you could hear, the audio, this is amazing, because this person is legitimately screaming. There we go. Right? It's like, how cool is that? Other kids are doing other things, and a bunch of kids said, what are you going to do today? Let's go to school to the storage room, and let's build a roller coaster out of our school desk. I look at that, and I said, sometimes when you leave people unsupervised, amazing things happen. And it's the same way with the church. Sometimes we leave the church unsupervised, amazing things happen. Where we don't micromanage it from the middle like our staff or other leaders that are expected to do things. We do things like the Big Give, where we give a group of people a $500 gift card and say, I want you to meet needs around you, and let's just see what happens. And you allow those people without any barriers, just prayer and their ingenuity and their imagination begin to change lives all around them. Here's my point this morning. I think that if we want to present a life that works to the world around us, we need to be more optimistic and less controlling. Instead of arms crossed, furrowed brow, like some people have a meme of the church out there, what if we said, who knows and you bet more often? Or if you're in Minnesota, you say, you betcha. Who knows what might happen around us if we said, who knows and you bet. This next one's cool. This is a picture of a dad. His kids are shoveling the snow. They are 6 and they're 10 years old, and there's a guy on a wheelchair, so they must have driven by this guy's house. His kids must have stopped him and said, Dad, I think that we can help this man. And so they are shoveling the snow. And so there's a proud dad moment here. And so you can imagine as a parent, if you raise kids, you've helped raise kids, you have those days where you're like, is anything that we're trying to teach our kids sticking? I seem like we have to take them to task on every little thing. I mean, the socks are always wadded up. This toilet seat never gets put down. How many times we have to say that? Are they listening? Are they watching? Are they taking anything in? And then something like this happens and you say, it's not so bad. But dad and mom probably had to model a way of behavior before these young men to where they would stop their dad on a snowy day, put down the Nintendo Switches, and say, Dad, let's bundle up, let's get the shovels, and let's help this guy. Here's a video of a kid named Bryce Wisdom. He's a high school student with a serious form of cancer, and this is his last day of school before 25 straight weeks of chemotherapy. Because when your friend and classmate and teammate is going to be in hospital for a long, long time, you could send a card or you can cancel the lecture on planar geometry in order to crowd the hallways and to say, hey, we're here with you. You don't need to be afraid because we're here with you. Here's a video of Youngstown State in their last game of the year, and this is their injured and senior quarterback, Nathan Hayes. He didn't play the last game. You can see here, like he doesn't have any grass stains on him, so he didn't play. But this is called victory formation. When the offense has enough points and there's not a lot of time left, they don't have to actually run official plays. They do the kneel down thing. And even though another quarterback played this game, they wanted to honor Nathan's sacrifice to the program and his effort along the way. So instead of the starting quarterback that day, they helped a hobbling senior quarterback out to take the snaps in victory formation. If we want to present a way of life that works around us, we need to go the extra mile. We need to do things that are surprising and surprisingly generous, things that no one's quite expecting. It's almost embarrassingly generous when they receive it because God has so richly blessed us. In return, in response, we can shovel the snow. We can crowd the hallway and have a pep rally for a friend who's getting cancer treatment. And we can help someone out on the field to honor them and their legacy. What we do is we model a new way of life. It'll allow imaginations to swell and habits to develop. Dottie Davis, Dottie Lewis, who was a preacher in the church, he said, you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. And sometimes this happens in the church where we're teaching the right things, but we're not living the right pattern of life. And people, 100% of the time, will watch what we are doing before they care about what we're saying. And in a world that is becoming a little bit more dismayed with the church by the year, I think they're eager for us to be good news so they can hear us preach good news. And so what's most important for us is how do we handle ourselves in very tense moments? How do we handle ourselves in disagreements? How do we raise our children with the watching world around us? How do we spend our resources and our money? How do we use our opportunities? What do we do with our vacation time? What do we do with our friendships? What do we do with the gifts that we have? Is it something that's pointing towards Christ? Or is it not allowing people to see a clear picture of who Jesus is? The way that we model speaks way louder than the words that we say. And so we want to continue to try to have an impact on the watching world around us. We will model a new way of life. We have this video of a young man who's being adopted in a courtroom in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's been in the foster care system for a little bit, and he's been fostered by this family. And you'll notice the kids in the background, that's his entire kindergarten class. So instead of spending their field trip day on a museum or the zoo, they're watching their friend Michael get adopted by a loving family. Yeah. What this speaks to me and says to me is that we need to show up to the things that matter most. I'm afraid of our world has a new pattern where we can kind of catch up and record everything and watch it later. We're kind of I'll check in on that later type of a society now. And so what's important for us to do is to get into the pattern of showing up to the things that matter the most around us. Because even though we could check in on things later, we could watch things later, we can check somebody's status update later, even though we're more connected than any other human civilization before us, we are still chronically lonely and prone to crippling anxiety and depression, even though we're the most connected people the world has ever seen. And so, my friends, I don't know what you and I need to do, but we need to live life in such a way where we show up so that when our friend says, hey, we're going to adopt our 5-year-old son, could you come to the court with us as we do so? We don't have a conflict, but we have the space open. Some of us say, I'd love to show up more things. I would love to be there, but my life is too busy. Well, I give you the philosophy of Bob Goff, who says, you need to quit something every Thursday until you get your life back. Just quit it. Every Thursday, set an alarm for 10 a.m., quit something until we get our lives back. And who knows the types of things that we might be able to experience with others if we get space in our life in order to be able to show up and to be present in the most important things that we have. This is a video. It's actually a still shot of the Scott Van Pelt show on SportsCenter. It tells the story of Brandon Matthews, who's a golfer, and he was in the third hole of a playoff hole of the last day of a tournament that he was in. He and another golfer were competing for the winner of the tournament, and he needed to sink about a 9-foot putt in order to force a fourth playoff hole. So the pressure is big, it's building. And as he's in the backswing of his putt, somebody yelled from the stands. It startled him. He mishit the ball and he missed the putt completely. And if you watch the clip, he is visibly disturbed because he feels like he's lost everything because of somebody else's mistake. He loses his temper. But after a while, some of the golf officials say that the person in the crowd who did the yelp during his backswing was an elderly man with Down syndrome who couldn't contain the excitement, could not be quiet during that moment. And so he let out a gasp, which caused him to miss his shot. And so instead of saying, well, that's his loss, that was his mistake, and going on with his own life, Brandon Matthews went through that crowd. He put his arm around that guy, and he said he was sorry because he said, having grown up around illnesses like this most of my life, I know that there's something bigger than golf going on around here. Here's the message from this, that we need to learn to apologize. Because it's the first thing we did to enter the faith. We could not become a Christian unless we apologize to God and we apologize to others for all the broken and silly and sinful things, the foolish things that we've done in this life. But one of the things that I grieve is that as I watch Christians grow up, even though we know how to apologize initially, we tend to get hardened. We tend to avoid having to apologize to one another. We avoid people. We ghost people. We justify our actions. We say that it's up to them. We even say, quote unquote, I'm praying about it, instead of apologizing. But here's something I've come to know. Maybe you've seen this as well. The language of apology is more provocative than the language of mastery. I'd rather listen to a lowly person, a humble person who admits their mistakes, instead of tries to spin them and to point a different direction so that people don't know their mistakes. And I just want to tell you, there are many people in our culture who will not admit mistakes. If that's a person that you and I admire, they don't deserve our admiration. They are blind guides. We go deeper in the faith when we are in touch with our own brokenness, and instead of trying to justify it or just try to get over it over time but apologize for it, we actually grow during those moments. One of my favorite quotations from Richard Rohr, he says that he prays every day for a great humiliation and for the eyes to see it. I've just recognized in my own Christian walk that if we can't pray a prayer like that, we're not going to go deeper in the faith. Maybe that's going to be your 2020 resolution, to ask God for a great humiliation every single day and for the eyes to see it and for the guts to do something about it. What that does is it opens us up. It doesn't make it about us. Our pride begins to erode, and we begin to look out and for ways that we can build up people around us. And so the closing video that I want to show this morning is a video of a 12-year-old kid named Jonathan who's colorblind, and his principal is as well. So his principal gives him those amazing glasses where you can now see colors even though you're colorblind, and his mom's filming it. And as a middle school student, he's trying to keep it cool. But he's overwhelmed with emotion.
Awesome. Hey, come here. Come here, dude. Oh, I'm so happy for you. Ma, you better be in there too. That is so awesome. I told you it's going to be a little emotional. Hey,
I look at a video like that, what it tells me is that is the role of the church, it's the role of the Christian, is to enter around the world around us where there's people who they've got hang-ups about religion. They got hang-ups about God. They've had experiences that prevent them from wanting to seek further. And all that we're trying to do is open up their eyes a little bit. Give a little color from our experience in the faith. I had gone to church when I was a younger kid. I remember it being so boring and irrelevant. I remember I used to try to hide from my dad on Sunday morning so that if he didn't find me in the house, I'd kill enough time so I wouldn't have to go to church. But then some lowly people, humble people came along, and they didn't load me down with the most inspiring things, the most profound things. They just modeled a new way of life in front of me. It allowed me to see things in a wider range of colors, and it opened my heart to Jesus. And the greatest experience that you and I could have as Christians is to walk alongside a few individuals, countless people, and do nothing more than just help open their eyes to the world that they haven't been able to see completely. They've got a shape of it. They haven't seen the depth of the hue of how wonderful the colors might be, how wonderful this faith might be. And if we could do that, then we'll have lived a life that is truly life. I'll close with my favorite quotation about the Christian life from G.K. Chesterton. He said, "The more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it was established rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild." And that's going to be my blessing that I want to give and the challenge I want to give to Advent Church. Is that you continue to organize yourselves, begin to dream and do things where good things can run wild. Because it's been happening since Dave and Linda Schieber moved from Pennsylvania to Cordova, Tennessee, went door to door asking people if they were interested in being part of a new church plant. And it's been happening in 100 different ways over these past 41 years. If you allow that to do so, if you give yourselves over to that with the energy that God provides, what an amazing experience it will continue to be a part of Advent Presbyterian Church.